welcome to livealittlehigher.com. This week we read Parashat Savo, and in the book of the Shem Mishmuel, he gives us a beautiful explanation about how the mitzvah of Bikurim, of bringing the first fruits to the temple, offering them, is connected to prayer. And so in this Torah portion, it opens with this mitzvah of Bikurim, which is the one of bringing the first fruits in these times when the Jewish people entered the land of Israel. Was the Mishkan, the tabernacle that was built in the desert, which was transported into the land of Israel, and later on, many years later, it was then transferred to Jerusalem, where the first temple stood, and then the second temple stood. So this mitzvah was that when the Jewish people settled the land and they started growing produce in the land, they had to set apart the first fruits that came from their agricultural fields, and they would take them and put them apart, and they would bring them as an offering to the temple. They would tie a red knot on them, a red string, so they would know which they were, and they would bring these first fruits to the Kohen in the times of the temple and the Mishkan, and they would bring them to him, wave them before the altar in the Beis Hamikdash, and then the owner made a declaration about the history of the Jewish people and how God brought them out from slavery and promised them this land. And so now we're gonna see how this mitzvah was so important. Why was it so important? And they would bring from the 7 species of the land of Israel, that this is what they offered. And these 7 species are wheat, barley, grape, fig, pomegranate, olive, and dates. And these were the first fruits. So in the Midrash, in Tahuma, in Savo, it says, Moshe gazed with Ruach HaKodesh, Moshe gazed with divine inspiration, and saw that in the future the Beit HaMikdash would be destroyed. He knew that it would be destroyed, and that the Bikurim would terminate, that this would be the end of it, of this very big mitzvah. So he arose and instituted for Israel that they should pray 3 times daily. And so the 3 prayers that we do today, which is the Shaharit, Minha, and Arvit prayers that we do, are actually instead of this mitzvah of Bikurim, of bringing the best of our fruit to the Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash. So the mitzvah of Bikurim is considered to be the most fundamental to Jewish life. The commentator said that Hashem created the whole world just for the mitzvah of Bikurim. And Rabbi Huna said, in the name of Rabbi Matna, the world was created in the merit of 3 things. In the merit of Challah, which is challah, many people think that challah is the braided bread that we eat on Shabbat, but actually challah is the mitzvah of separating from the dough before you braid it and bake it. You separate a piece from this dough, and you wrap it and you burn it. And this is the mitzvah of challah. And in the olden days, when the temple stood, people would bring their halahs, their first halahs, they would bring to the temple. So in the merit of masros, tithes, and in the merit of bikurim. So tithes is like taking out the maser, taking out the 10% of what you do, of what you earn, and then you give for tzedakah. So what is the reason? There is no beginning, but bikurim, as the verse says, the first of the bikurim of your field, and this is in Shemot. And why is this mitzvah considered to be of such great significance? And that is the observance justified the creation of the world. Like, why would the world be created just for this mitzvah? And so we have to understand the different commentators. There's a quote from the Zohar, which discusses the declaration which the donor of the Bikurim makes to the Kohen at the Beit HaMikdash. And so they need to show and concede that only because of the divine kindness, Hesed, do they merit all this and dwell in the land and he brought them into the land, provided them with all of their goodness. This is why they must say all of these things to the Kohen, because he represents the Hesed of God. So this is the Zohar. What the Zohar is saying is that when a person takes from the first of what he has, and he takes as an offering to God, we offer giving to the Kohen because he's a representative of the kindness of Hashem. When we're doing this, we're acknowledging that all the goodness that we have in our lives was given to us by God. Like, God is kindness, and nothing he does in this world doesn't come out of kindness. Sometimes we see it like not so kind, but in reality, everything comes from his kindness. So the Zohar will be the key to our understanding to this fundamental role of the Bikurim in the Jewish thought, and it declares that the function of the mitzvah of Bikurim is to emphasize to the individual, and indeed to make him declare, that his very existence in Eretz Israel is dependent not on his own merits, but on the grace of God. So this mitzvah, what it did, is that it made people aware that they're in the land of Israel not because of them. They didn't deserve it. Or even if they deserve it, they're not there because they deserve it. They're there because Hashem wants them there. It's only because of Hashem's kindness that he took us out of Egypt, that he took us through the desert, that he fed us, that he took care of us to bring us to the land of Israel. So this, we may suggest, is akin to the purpose of creation itself. For mankind to realize that he was created through the Hesed of God. That we have to recognize that if we're in this world and we're breathing today, and you're watching Live a Little Higher, it's just because Hashem is kind to you. We're here because of his kindness. If he would not want to, he would just like make everything disappear in one instant. So the Rambam tells us the intention of all the mitzvot is that we should believe in our God and concede to him that he created us. So all this system of mitzvot that Hashem creates, 613 mitzvot, in which 248 we do and 365 we don't do, all these things, all this Torah that we learn and everything are being alive and in this world, everything that we have and we see and we perceive is only there so we can recognize that Hashem created us and that he's kind to us. So in the merit of the Bikurim, the world was created, and that is the idea which underlies the mitzvah, is also the concept which motivates the whole creation of the world. So Bikurim, the bringing of the Bikurim encompasses the three main arenas of human life, which is thought, speech, and action, which the Alter Rebbe also calls the garments of the soul. This is what dresses our soul, our thought, our speech, and our actions. And the fruits were brought to the Beit HaMikdash way before the altar and set down. And these are actions. So the people picked up the first fruits and they put them in a basket, and they did the journey to Jerusalem for the festivals, and they brought this fruit is action. And the owner of the fruit recited the declaration, a speech in which he recognizes that Hashem took them out of Egypt and he saved them from Pharaoh and he took care of them in the desert. And this is speech, the declaration. And finally, he prostrates himself before leaving. And this is an expression of intellectual submission to the will of God, which takes place in thought. And this is the only mitzvah in the whole Torah where the Jew had to prostrate himself. And this explains why Bikurim is considered such a dear mitzvah in God's eyes, for the entire personality is involved in its performance. Like, it's a mitzvah that thought, speech, action, your whole being is immersed in that mitzvah. And these three categories of human activity correspond to and are motivated by the three parts of the soul. We have actually 5 levels of the soul, but there's 3 levels that we are aware of, which is the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama. The nefesh is the instinctive level of the soul, the ruach is the emotional level of the soul, and the neshama is the intellectual level of the soul. And we don't see the whole personality involved in realizing this mitzvah, because the way your instincts, your emotion, and your intellect are all involved in doing this mitzvah. And with this, we may return to the Midrash, with which we begin, which is true that Moshe Rabbeinu saw with prophetic vision that the Beit HaMikdash was going to be destroyed, and that this mitzvah of Bikurim was not going to be existent. We don't do this mitzvah anymore because we don't have a temple. And so, but it was the future loss of the Bikurim which particularly distressed Moshe Rabbeinu. It really gave him a lot of pain. And he felt that the great feelings aroused by this mitzvah would not be allowed to terminate with the loss of the Beit HaMikdash, and thus instituted a system of prayer to compensate. So prayer, it is evident that the overriding function of prayer is to subjugate ourselves to God, is to subjugate our personalities, to give ourselves into Hashem, and by admitting one's reliance upon Him. And we learned that the Avot, our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov, they instituted the three prayers. So Abraham, who was kindness, who was the personification of Hesed, instituted Shaharit, which is the morning prayer. Isaac instituted the Mincha prayer, which is the afternoon prayer. And Yaakov instituted the Mariv, or the Arvit prayer, which is the night prayer. Abraham, as I said before, represents kindness. He also represents the intellect. And he was the first to break away from idolatry. We know that he, as a small child, was meditating on the world. He looked at the world. He looked at creation. He wondered, and he came to realize and declare that there's only one God, and that God not only created the world and takes care of it, but that He's very involved in every aspect of every person's life at every instant. So he had no Rebbe, he had no father, so from whom did he learn Torah? He says that God prepared his two kidneys like two rabbis, and they sprung forth and taught him Torah and wisdom. So this is from Bereshit Rabbah. Abraham's intense intellectual dedication prompted him to institute Shaharit, the morning service, and the Hebrew word for the morning is boker, as we say, boker tov, good morning, which also means clarity. And it is a time of intellectual clarity for mankind, and thus correspond to Abraham himself. Isaac, on the other hand, he represents Gevura, which is boundaries, strictness, and although he was devoted to his father, he not only was he able to sanctify his intellect, but also he sanctified his emotional soul. So we see that Abraham was all about intellect, about pondering and looking and wondering, and Isaac had a connection to his emotions. So he was so connected to his emotions that he was prepared to offer his life on the altar, and this showed that he was completely subjugated to God's will. And it is the emotional soul. This is from his emotions, and which is the source of the human ability to talk, as it was the conjunction on his soul with the body, which first enabled Adam Aharishon, the first man, to be able to speak. And so Isaac instituted the afternoon prayer, which is called Mincha, which corresponds to the emotions, corresponds to the soul. And this verse describes not a person bringing a mincha offering, for which our daily mincha service is named, but instead a soul. And when a soul will offer a mincha sacrifice to God. So the prayer in the middle of the day, that is the afternoon prayer, that's the hardest prayer to come to. Because yes, in the morning you wake up early, you give yourself a time to pray, but this mincha prayer is like in the middle of the day. Like once the sun sets, you cannot say it anymore. And usually people are busy at this time of the day. It's the busiest time of the day. Men are working, women are with the kids. It's not an easy time to stop whatever you're doing and go and pray. And actually this takes a lot of emotion. So indeed, the word mincha finds its root in the word menucha, which means peace, peace of mind, rest. And the state of rest intended is one experienced by the soul, and we see clearly that the nefesh corresponds to Isaac. who thus inaugurated the Mincha prayer. And finally, it was Yaakov who instituted the Mariv prayer, which is the night prayer when the day has ended, and this is achieved as a still higher level of personal development than either his father or grandfather, and was able to sanctify not only his intellect and emotions, but even his physical body. And he was totally in control of his body, and then generally considered to have been the perfect specimen of humanity, as is evident from the following. Yaakov was a perfect man dwelling in tents. This is in Bereshit. And he offered sacrifices to God of his father Isaac. We know that Yaakov represents also the attribute of Tiferet, which is compassion, mercy, harmony, his balance, his half Hesed, half Gebura, half kindness, half strictness. It creates a perfect person. From Yaakov, we have the 12 tribes came into the world through him because of his perfection. And we see that Yaakov offered peace offerings, the forerunners of the Shelamim offerings, which brought peace between God and the Kohanim and the owner, as each received a piece of the animal. Only Yaakov, in distinction from Abraham and Isaac, is recorded as having brought these offerings, for only a man who has reached physically as well as intellectually and emotionally perfection may bring an offering from which he may eat. So he brought that offering that he gave, that in the times of the temple we didn't have set prayers. It was the korbanot that were brought to the temple, the sacrifices. During the day, the sacrifices were sacrifices that were made out of not animal sacrifices. Only the nightly sacrifices were animal sacrifices because of the level of Yaakov. Because only a person that had this rectification of mind, body, intellect, emotions, and his body can bring an offering that is being able to be consumed as holy food, and because it sanctifies the physical. Thus, Yaakov instituted the Mariv prayer, which corresponds to the limbs and fats of the animal offerings, which roasted overnight on the altar in the Beit HaMikdash, and these are the most physical parts of the offerings, and thus correspond to Yaakov, the man who sanctified the three arenas of human life. And Rabbi the Shem Mishmuel, he finishes off saying, we have seen that each of these three daily prayer services, which correspond to the forefathers, provide unique opportunities to subjugate ourselves to the will of Hashem. Shaharit is for the intellect. If you go through the Siddur and you read the liturgy of the prayer of Shaharit, is all about contemplation, recognizing Hashem in your life. It talks about the wonders He has done for us, about how He created the world, how He took us out of Egypt, how He parted the sea for us. It's all about contemplation and intellect. Mincha, the emotions, is more emotional, and Mariv, the physical. So combined, these prayers have the potential to replace the opportunity for connection to God, which was lost when the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and the mitzvah of Bikurim was cancelled. Thus, when Moshe, in his great wisdom, saw in a prophecy that one day the people of Israel, Klal Israel, would no longer be able to bring the Bikurim, he arose and he instituted these three prayers. So I wish you a blessed week, and remember, live a little higher. Thank you.